Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. Virginia Tech football coming off the heels of a tough one, a 34-3 loss down in Louisville. We'll break it all down for you with our football crew coming up. It's episode 327 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. We record on Monday, November 6, 2023 from our Tech Sideline studios at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead, leave us a like, a comment, and subscribe. And do us a favor, refer the show to a friend as well. Let's go ahead and introduce the football crew on set. To my right, lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. Across the way, as always, our senior staff writer, Andy Bitter. In the fourth chair, managing editor David Cunningham. Producing behind the scenes, we got Key McCrimmon making his podcast debut, and Will Stewart helping out as well, our founder and general manager. I'm Giovanni Heater, and thanks again for joining us on this Monday morning. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. The Tech Sideline podcast is also, though, brought to you by Coldwell Banker Townside Realtors, trusted real estate agent services for the Roanoke and New River Valleys of Virginia. If you're in the market to purchase or sell a residential property, or if you're looking for land or investment property in Southwest Virginia, we have you covered. 3 offices in the area. Visit cbtownside.com to learn more. Gentlemen, a tough one. 34-3, the final score in Louisville. Bit of a reality check for the Hokies, I feel like it's fair to say.
I think so. I think there's obviously a big difference between like Louisville and Florida State and the rest of the league. I think, like, I don't know who the third best team in the conference is. I guess maybe you could say it's North Carolina, but even they've got major weaknesses. And I think there's a big difference even between the middle of the conference and the bottom of the conference, because we've seen Virginia Tech just hammer 3 of the bottom 4 teams in the league. So there's been some upsets and things like that this year, but I think generally speaking, we know the pecking order of the league right now, and Florida State and Louisville are clearly at the top.
Yeah, there's this sort of creamy middle of the ACC, and Virginia Tech clearly belongs in that group based on results this year. I think the other takeaway I take from that game is, man, Louisville's pretty good and perhaps closer to Florida State than the rest of the pack. And I thought that maybe that was less the case going into that game. There's not really a weak part on that team. They're a physical team. They're pretty experienced. They have explosive players. Quarterback who's solid. I don't think he's a spectacular guy, but he didn't make any mistakes out there. And he threw 1 incompletion in the game on Saturday. So I came out of that thinking, man, Louisville could give Florida State a game in this ACC championship. I mean, they're pushing the top 10 right now. I think they're worthy of that ranking. And, on the flip side, the Hokies not ready for prime time yet. That was pretty evident.
So let's piggyback off that a little bit, Andy. Is this more Virginia Tech, okay, it was kind of a comeback down to earth moment, or is it more, okay, Louisville's that good and you can kind of hang your hat with this one on Saturday? Like, are you disappointed in the lack of competitiveness out of the Hokies?
I thought Louisville would win. I thought the Hokies would at least be competitive. I, at the very least, expected them to show a pulse. They didn't even show a pulse in that game. I mean, even if you lose by 20 or something like that, if you showed some fight at various points or sustained some things. I mean, I wrote it. You look at the losses earlier this year, there's a silver lining in a lot of those losses. Purdue, they came back from a 17-0 deficit. It was a weird weather delay. They were in that game. Rutgers, I feel like you could see Kyron Drones grow on every drive. He got a little bit better as he started to get used to playing quarterback and be the starter there. Marshall, they ran the ball well. They just didn't run it enough. Florida State, terrible first quarter. They played him even the final 3 quarters. I don't know what you take out of this Louisville game. There was no point to go, well, and it's like John Love made another field goal. I guess that's pretty good. Peter Moore punted it all right. Bashal Tootin, I guess, ran the ball well, limited number of carries, but there's nothing you go, man, they fought. It's like they didn't really fight. It was never really close throughout the whole thing. They never made it interesting. Maybe outside of that one drive right before halftime that ended up with a field goal. I
thought Nasir Peoples really came to play.
Yeah,
that's just about like physically. I thought
pads were popping earlier with
sure.
Nasir.
I think I had a good read on Louisville. Like everything I wrote before the game about them, that turned out to be exactly who they are, which makes me wonder why I actually picked Virginia Tech to only lose by 7 in hindsight, because I guess I just thought Virginia Tech was ready to play a better game against a good team than they have in the past. So I think a lot of that was Louisville. Some of it was Virginia Tech. I mean, early in the game, Virginia Tech came out really mentally unfocused. First play of the game, the guy just comes through unblocked. There's one Louisville defender being triple teamed, and one comes through unblocked. And that's what happens when you start two freshmen next to each other on the offensive line.
I was watching that play, and I was trying to figure out what even the play design, because it almost looked like they were trying to set up a screen, possibly. But
let me continue. I've got more from the very first drive. Then Virginia Tech has a false start, and then on third down they throw a screen pass out to the wide receiver, but yet there's a running back running a flare pass right behind the wide receiver. That was a busted play.
It didn't even look like it was intended for Lane. He just kind of caught it like out of self-preservation.
Well,
the ball was coming at him.
I think Drones went to pass, and he saw two of them there, and it kind of seemed like he kind of threw it right between both of them, and then he kind of threw his hands up like that. So that drive was discombobulated from the start. And so any chance Virginia Tech has of winning on the road against a team like Louisville, you have to come in with 100% mental focus, and they did not. They clearly did not. So I think, obviously, Louisville, whether the game was in Lane, whether it was on a neutral site, whether it was on the road, I think Louisville would have been a bridge too far at this point. But Tech clearly still has some mental issues with playing on the road and getting off to starts and things like that, because their last road game, Florida State, bam, 17-0 at the end of the first quarter. And while this one wasn't as bad on the scoreboard, you look at the first half, it could have been. It certainly could have been.
Yeah, no doubt, especially when Louisville, they miss a field goal at one point as well, that could have added to their lead. I ask you guys, is Louisville proof now that in this modern era of college football, it just seems like, okay, you can literally build a successful team in 1 year. Is this a model that you think other programs, maybe even Virginia Tech, should start to look at and be like, we got to try and replicate that?
Well, let's not act like Louisville was just completely bottomed out. I mean, that was a bowl team last year. Satterfield was getting out ahead of the posse there for a different opportunity. I don't think he liked it there. I don't think they liked him there. So, this was a team that, I mean, they played in the Fenway Bowl last year against Cincinnati. I forget what their record was. If they were 6-6, 7-5, they were mediocre team, but they did not bottom out. The team that played in that Fenway Bowl was not like the team that Virginia Tech put on the field in the Pinstripe Bowl in 2021. There were vastly different rosters with that. Now, I have to credit Brom. I mean, he's come in there right away. They've taken a ton of transfers at that program, a lot of impact transfers. One didn't even play. They didn't even have their best receiver in that game.
Their leading receiver for that game, 17 catches for
that Guarendo guy they got from Wisconsin, who apparently Virginia Tech pursued. I didn't realize that until Pry mentioned it after the game. He looked fantastic. They didn't even really have to lean on Jawar Jordan, one of the best running backs in the league. They had this backup come in, and he ran over them too. So they've put a lot of pieces in place. They got the coach they wanted all along. But I think in terms of where the programs were when these coaches took over, Louisville was a little bit more advanced than Virginia Tech was.
Yeah, Louisville always has solid talent, and they did hit the portal really hard to supplement what they already had. And then not to mention, that's just a really talented coaching staff, in my opinion. I think we said it last week, credit to Brom, both Broms, and the rest of the staff. They won at Purdue, which is really hard to do.
Like played the Big Ten title game at Purdue.
Yeah. Purdue, the only time Purdue's ever won, like that I can ever remember, was like when Drew Brees was there.
Joe Tiller.
Right.
Hall of Famer Joe Tiller.
Exactly. It takes a really special coach to win at Purdue, and I think that's what Louisville's got now. I think they've got a really upper echelon coaching staff.
What went wrong with the offense on Saturday? 140 yards of total offense for Virginia Tech. You look at the other side, Louisville had 382 yards, 231 on the ground. Why couldn't Tech get things going?
They were playing behind the chains the whole game, and that's the one thing this offense cannot do. It's the spitting image of the 2019 Hendon Hooker offense. All right, so you've got a redshirt sophomore quarterback with very limited experience, just like 2019 when Hendon Hooker was a redshirt sophomore quarterback with very little experience. That 2019 offensive line by the end of the year was starting 3 freshmen on the offensive line. Virginia Tech is currently starting 2 freshmen next to each other on the offensive line, but then they're bringing in 2 freshmen off the bench. So 4 of their 7-man rotation is all freshmen. So you can't be in long yardage situations. You're going to have some mental breakdowns to begin with, but when the other team knows you have to pass it, then they're going to crush you. Like the 2019 offense was really good until they got in situations where the other team knew they were going to have to pass. Like at the end of the game in the UVA game in 2019, when Tech started out at maybe their own 15, and UVA knew they had to throw it, and Hendon Hooker just like that is getting sacked every other play. But because the smoke and mirrors aspect of the offense was gone at that point, I think Tech got off to a bad start because of their own mental screw ups early in the game. Plus Louisville's talent level. Let's not forget that. But once it's 14-3 or 21-3. The running game goes out the window at that point, and they know you're going to throw it, and that's not how this Virginia Tech offense is built. The offensive line isn't experienced enough. The quarterback isn't experienced enough.
Yeah, this was Pry after the game, so we just didn't block them well enough in the run game or the throw game. So, I think this offensive line had taken some strides. You look at that PFF grade after the Syracuse game, where they ran for 318 yards. O-line did not get high marks in that game necessarily for blocking, and this one was even worse. Louisville, I think, is a pretty good defensive front. They gave them troubles all game long, but I think this was definitely a reality check for where this offensive line is and what its capabilities are. You mentioned getting behind the sticks. Virginia Tech faced third down situations where they needed 19, 14, 32, 27, 18, and 13 yards.
Average of 16 yards.
3rd and 8 or longer, they were 0 for 8. I mean, it's just not a team built to pick up that kind of yardage.
And against Syracuse, they averaged 8 yards per play on first down, right? I believe that was it.
And this one was 2.3.
Right.
Tied for their lowest all season with Old Dominion, surprisingly, of all the games where they had worse first down production. So, I mean, you remember some of those games where they got back into it and they're in 3rd and short. And even if they don't pick that up, which they didn't a lot, 4th and 1, they can go for that with Kyron Drones as their quarterback. He has so many options on short yardage situations, and how can you use him there? When it's 4th and 10 or 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, it's like, okay, he's going to drop back and pass it. Not the strength of his game at this point. It's still developing, I'd say. So, you got to get ahead of the sticks. Can't be behind it like that the whole time. And that really put him behind the 8 ball this whole game.
Kind of felt like they almost, at the beginning of the game, got away from what had been working. Felt like there was a little bit less of this pre-snap movement and this deception. Was that something you guys noticed as well, particularly very early first couple of drives in the first quarter?
Well, there wasn't a whole lot of time to do it. I mean, they went 3 and out very quickly. They didn't sustain many drives. I think they had one drive that was longer than 27 yards, and it was that field goal drive that they had. So they never really had a chance to get into a rhythm. And I think they just discombobulated the whole time on offense. That showed in the total yardage.
I thought it was there. Like the first play of the game was supposed to be some kind of a screen, some sort of a deceptive play. The third play of the first drive was a man in motion. It was just a bunch of guys, don't know who it was. I don't know whether it was supposed to be wide receiver screen or a running back flare, but it was both, and it didn't work. And so I think it was there. I just think there were major execution problems, and the team that just mentally was not ready to play on the road. And I think Louisville, quite frankly, is just better and made them look bad too. So I don't have any issues with the scheme or the game plan. And this one, they just got outplayed.
How would you assess the quarterback play out of Kyron Drones on Saturday?
Well, he's exactly what I thought he would be. I think he's going to be a very effective quarterback when the running game is working and you're staying ahead of the sticks. And he's going to be 12 of 21 for 69 yards when you're behind the sticks. That's just a simple fact. I mean, that's he's exactly who I thought he was. And I think so. I think Virginia Tech coaching staff is post Marshall have done a good job of using him. But I think this was a game where, things around him need to go right for him to be effective, just like his predecessor, I think. The good news is, there's no more Louisvilles on the schedule.
Fair.
Yeah, I'd say not great, but that's pretty much my assessment of the entire offense.
Right.
When you have your, fewest yards in 8 years, fourth fewest yards since 1987. I mean, there's not a lot of positives to put out there in this offense. And, in Drones' defense, and Louisville was on him every single play. I mean, that first play was just a sign of things to come. He was sacked 4 times. I think they had 19 pressures or something like that. He was under constant pressure in the pocket. When that's the case, it's tough for any quarterback to really put up big numbers or any kind of numbers. So it was just a struggle from start to finish.
Somebody I was impressed with was Plummer on the other side, Jack Plummer, quarterback for the Cards. He just kind of played the game, right? Only threw it 12 times. Andy had mentioned this. Started 7 for 7 in the first half. Didn't really take any risks and just let his tailbacks carry the load. They used that RPO, were able to mix that in, and they ended up scoring on it with that Jaden Thompson dump over the middle. He just kind of played the game and didn't try and do too much at all.
I said on the preview podcast last week, I said if Louisville is smart, they will run. And they're smart. Remember in their wins this year, they were averaging 24 throws per game or something like that. And in their one loss, it was 53. That's how important the running game is to their offense. Well, they really doubled down on the run this week, despite the fact that Jawar Jordan was apparently banged up and not 100%. I just think they looked at Virginia Tech's weaknesses as a defense and said, look, every time Virginia Tech plays a team with a pulse, they can't stop the run, so we're just going to hammer them. They didn't really start throwing the ball with Plummer until later in the game, but at that point, their running game was so effective that he goes 11 of 12 for 141 yards. I think he's a solid, competent player, but if it's 3rd and 8 all the time, then he's not 11 of 12, right? I just think their running game set up so much stuff for their quarterback to be successful. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but I'm just saying that Kyron Drones and Jack Plummer are different players, but I think Jack Plummer, he got what happened around him in the game was exactly what needed to happen for him to have a good passing game.
He stayed out of the way.
Right. What happened to Kyron Drones in the game was the exact opposite of what needed to happen for him to have a good passing game. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think Brom knows how to coach quarterbacks. That's his thing. His brother is the offensive coordinator, correct?
Yep.
You look at Plummer's history. He's an experienced guy. He goes all the way back to Purdue. Yeah. He played against Pry's Penn State team in 2019. He's the starting quarterback as a freshman that year. So he's been around. There's a reason why Brom went and got this guy from Cal. This is his 3rd team that he's on. And, they manage him well. They don't put a whole lot on his shoulders. And he goes out there and he executes what he needs to in this offense. And then this one, there wasn't really a whole lot of need to throw the ball. And he looked very efficient out there as a quarterback.
You talked about, Chris, if you look at the defensive side of the football, that the run woes have returned. Not only that, felt like the big play run woes have returned. Granted, it wasn't these 62, 85-yarders like at Florida State, but these longer runs. Garendo had an unbelievable game. Limited carries for Jawar Jordan allowed him to kind of step up. I just ask again, why? What allowed this defense to fall back into some of the old stuff they had gotten into?
They didn't fall back. They just faced a better team. They weren't. It's not that like they played. If you look at the linebacker grades against Syracuse, they weren't good. It's just Syracuse was so bad they couldn't take advantage of it. Like Syracuse is a poor. Sorry, I don't know you like to hear this, but Syracuse is a poor football team.
Correct.
And Louisville is not a poor football team. Now, it is interesting as far as the run defense. Like, Tech is either getting torched or they're absolutely shutting the other team down. There's never an average performance. There's no variation at all. It's domination either way, which is interesting because you look at most teams' box scores and you see a little bit of variance sometimes. Maybe they play above their heads one week or not as well as they should in another week. But for the Tech run defense, it's probably been the most consistent group in the country this year as far as either getting dominated or being totally dominant. There's never an average performance. This week they're facing a BC team that averages over 200 yards a game on the ground. So it's going to be another challenge this week, although for a different reason. This time it's the quarterback. So I don't think Tech's defense changes on a week-to-week basis. I think the level of competition changes. And I don't think anything's going to change from here on out. Each game's going to be decided by matchups and things like that. My view on the Tech defense remains unchanged. They need natural inside linebackers with a nose for the football, and they don't have that.
BC's won, what, 5 straight now?
Yep.
Wow.
They could also use Jalen Stroman back.
They could.
I think Jalen Jones is at the point in his development where it's just not ready for a role that large. Jalen Stroman, pretty good hitter out there when he keeps his head up, not getting a targeting penalty. They've not had those safeties play together for an entire game this year, and that's not a position where they have a lot of depth. I think a lot of the fits and the problems you're seeing, in addition to the linebacker play, shows up in that safety spot, and that's how a 10-yard run becomes a 40-yard run and a touchdown or something like that. So, and on top of that, that Louisville's offensive line, J.C. Price mentioned it ahead in the week that they're great at finishing. They're a really physical group, and they showed that the other day.
Yeah, I still have one bone to pick. Every time there's a starting safety out, Nasir Delane should be at safety. They need to use their cornerback depth because both cornerbacks can play safety, right? I know if you do that, then you can't run your nickel package as much, but there's not a huge need to run the nickel package anyway because Keontae Jenkins is your star linebacker and he's a former starting safety. He's already got coverage skills. So for me, every time I needed another safety in the game besides one of those top 2 guys, it's Nasir Delane playing safety. I think that gets your best 11 football players on the field. It's just the drop-off between the starting safeties and their 2 backups is immense. And if this season has taught me anything, or the targeting era in general has taught me anything, is you better have some safety depth because you never know when you're going to lose one. Safeties are more likely to get called for targeting, and then if you add on injuries to that, which has been an issue for Tech this year, you could end up playing backup safeties a lot. So that position is also now, I was always thinking about defensive tackle and I was always thinking about linebacker in the transfer portal. Now I'm also thinking about safety because Virginia Tech needs safety depth. They're going to lose Nasir Peoples this year.
Especially if it's more than one drive.
Yes.
It's like, oh, he's shaking up on the sideline. It's like, okay, that guy can get in. But if you're going to miss him for a half or be out for a whole game, he's just not going to play.
When you've got the whole
then
week
you have to make
prepare.
a wholesale shift and just commit to that and getting your best 11 on the field.
Do you think that, and I saw some buzz on Twitter about it, I didn't really feed into it a whole ton, but do you think that the fact that Jawar Jordan's carries were so much less than one would have expected, and Garendo was the one to kind of step up, did that play a factor at all when you spend all week game planning, like, hey, we got to go at one of the best tailbacks in the country here?
Nah, I think Louisville was going to do the same thing from a schematic standpoint, no matter which one of those tailbacks was in there. So
Jordan actually had more carries than Garendo. It just didn't feel that way because Garendo had 126
Every time he had
yards.
one
No, remember Garendo didn't he have like a 60-yarder called back too? Oh, for the hold.
For holding.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right. So,
So
it would have been
worse.
It would have been 12 for over 200, which was almost exactly
Benson-like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Didn't they end up missing a field goal on that drive
did.
too?
They did.
So he would have had 4 touchdowns then.
He could have.
That's great. Well, he had 3 the rest of that's wild right there. This is a situation where I think it doesn't play much of a factor, but say Jamari Thrash does play. Does that change anything?
Jamari Thrash, I'm sure, would have been a very effective blocker.
They're still running the football, you think?
Still running the football.
All right. I figured. Didn't get after the quarterback much this week. You had 15 total sacks in the last 2 weeks combined. You had 1 sack in this ball game. What was the difference?
Opportunity.
12 attempts.
I mean, they dropped back, and when they did, it wasn't a great pass rushing situation. They didn't put them in 3rd and long at all. There were no sort of duress plays or like if it's 3rd and 12, it's like, okay, I got to make something happen here. Maybe I hold on to it for an extra tick, and the D-line knows they can just sort of pin their ears back. They didn't have those opportunities. What was it? Cole Nelson had the one sack.
One sack.
He's opening drive in the second half.
Yeah, and I think they always say you need to earn that right to rush the passer, and that happens on 1st and 2nd down. You get to that 3rd down, and then you can really go after them, and they never got in those situations.
I will say this, Tech was credited with 8 pressures in this game. So 12 passes.
Tough to do on 12 passes.
Yeah. That's actually a high number of pressures. It's just he was able to get it out right before he was sacked or he was able to step up into the pocket. He doesn't have much athletic ability. I'm actually disappointed that he had positive rushing yards because for his career he actually has negative rushing yards.
Yep.
But
he only had 14 all year going to the game.
It was a little surprising that he had a couple keeps, but what he is pretty decent at, I mean, he's a veteran guy. He can step up in the pocket and can avoid it and things like that. But Tech was getting to him. It would have been nice if they had to make him throw it 30 times. And then I think you would have seen some more sacks in there.
Nasir Peoples, like you mentioned earlier, did have a nice game. Just a guy that, as we were calling the game, we're like, wow, he's kind of in on every play. He's doing a lot. They had that one play where Jawar Jordan took it up the middle and he kind of met him.
Yeah.
Oklahoma drilling the hole.
You could feel that one.
Yeah.
In the press box. That was a powerful hit.
Yeah. So what stood out to you guys specifically? I know you just kind of touched on it, but what did impress you with Nasir Peoples' game?
He was mentally strong. The one play I really liked was when he broke up but he made the tackle on the screen pass. Like, he diagnosed it immediately and just sliced in there and made the tackle. And Jordan was tackled before he even really turned around to start running. So I just thought he was mentally dialed in on exactly what Louisville was doing. And he brought a very physical presence to the game. It would be nice at some point if you could get a healthy Nasir. You see how good he's capable of playing, how well he's capable of playing when he's 100%. We know that Stroman can play well or does play well when he's 100%. Maybe one game this year will actually have both those guys for 100% for all 4 quarters. It might happen.
I don't even know if Nasir's 100%.
That's
He's
true.
Still got
He's
that big
probably
knee
not.
brace on,
Yeah.
and coming back from the knee injury that probably just needs time to rest. So the fact that he goes out there probably not 100% and playing like that, very impressive.
Did anybody else stand out to you at all? I know that, we're trying to find a silver lining. There really isn't one. You lose 34-3, but did anybody kind of impress on a couple of plays at all?
Yeah, I thought Feldarius Payne was good. I think he's generally been good for Tech this year. I don't think the defensive line on the whole was bad. I mean, some performances were better than others. I mean, the main issue in this game were linebacker and safety fits, as usual. I think there were a couple games early in the season where I don't think the defensive tackles, as experienced as they are, played as well as they were capable of playing. But I think they've been a lot better over the last 4 or 5 weeks. And I don't think it was. Whenever Virginia Tech's defense made a good play in this game, it was generally either Nasir Peoples or the defensive line. The corners didn't really have a chance to make any plays because they hardly. Louisville hardly threw the ball, but in general, I thought the defensive line helped. They hung in there. I'll say. And Feldarius Payne, he had a tackle and a half for loss. He stood out to me. Dante Lovett got in there and made a play towards the end, and that was nice to see.
John Love
had a field goal.
Got that streak going.
He kept the streak going, the
right.
scoring streak. If he missed that field goal, oh boy.
It would have been nice to end that. So they could stop putting that note in the game notes like it's some sort of accomplishment or something like that.
Right, they've scored.
It should have ended a couple times in the past, 2 or 3 times. By all right, it should have ended, though.
It should have ended in that BC game a couple years ago when all the quarterbacks were hurt. And
it should have ended twice in 2014. It was 30-0 Miami, and then they brought in Mark Leal with 2 minutes left, and they got a late junk touchdown. Then obviously Wake Forest, they didn't score until overtime.
Yeah, really, the streak has only been extended by technicalities.
Technicalities.
Regulation scoring, they have had a game with 0 points.
It felt like the turning point in the game, really, maybe not even a turning point, but Tech had a chance, right? You come out of the halftime break, you're like, really would have loved to have gotten a touchdown there. Instead, it was 14-3. You come back, Louisville has the ball, but then you force a 3 and out, you get that sack, and you're like, here you go. You need some points here. If you can generate a drive, and instead Tech goes 3 and out themselves.
Yeah, I think with the way both teams performed in the first half, I felt fortunate that it was 14-3 at halftime. And then Virginia Tech got that stop to start the second half, and I'm like, okay. I didn't think Tech played anywhere near what they were capable of in the first half. It's unlikely that they're going to come back against this Louisville team that's showing signs of having a big day running the football, but it is possible. You've got an opportunity. You've just got to play better than you did in the first half. They didn't. but the opportunity was there.
Well, they had that promising drive right before halftime. Then that pass to Gosnell.
The offensive pass.
Yeah, the offensive pass interference where Daquan Wright comes across the middle. What did you guys think of that? Because I thought it was a legit penalty. It looked like he set like a basketball pick and then extended his arms to make contact with the guy going by. It's like you can't make it obvious to the official by extending your arms and doing that.
I got Tristan Raish to comment on that on Twitter, our back judge. Ask a back judge. Let me find what he said.
I mean, it's a rub route. You're trying to do it, but you can't like extend your arms and make it obvious that you're
that was the main issue is he extended his arms. I think if he hadn't done that, like he didn't make much contact with him.
But he did make contact.
Right. He said, Tristan says, deep sigh. These ones suck. Yes, it was, quote, by rule, the correct call. The onus is on the offensive player to avoid contact. But Gosnell already had his man beat by a step or two. There was no reason for Wright to make any contact there. So it's one of those where theoretically you can call. Honestly, I think there have been more egregious pick plays not called on Virginia Tech. You know, I think I've seen Virginia Tech wide receivers in the past make those pick plays, and I'm like, man, I can't believe they didn't call
that. Was that Military Bowl against Cincinnati? They called on Dalton Keene.
Oh, I think you're right.
And I think that basically cost them the game.
Probably so.
How things played out. I thought that was a pretty egregious one.
I think the main thing is you got to keep your hands inside. It's kind of like holding.
They saw the arms extend and saw it make contact, even if the receiver had already beaten his guy and probably would have gotten past it. It wouldn't have even picked up the first down. I think it would have been 4th and 1.
Correct. Which, God, I remember before I saw the flag, I yelled out, all right, go for it. Because you need to, for me, with drones, 4th and 1 in the goal line, a field goal is not going to beat Louisville. You need to score a touchdown going in.
Well, how much time was left? Because people are like, oh, clock mismanagement by Pry, and I looked up the clock. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's halftime. This game is flying by. I had no idea.
12 or 13 seconds left when there was the penalty.
Right, correct.
But
they had all 3 timeouts left at that point.
Okay.
Yes, but because of the penalty, as soon as the ball was set, like
the clock
started. So it wasn't until like 8 seconds left. So they let like 5 seconds run off the clock, and then they called a timeout.
Right. It's like they didn't know the clock was going to restart.
If they had called timeout immediately,
then
they could have had potentially 1 or 2 plays to the end zone. Mm-hmm. But then with 8 seconds left,
they only had 1.
Well, it was 3rd down.
Correct. It was 3rd and 24 at that point.
Right. They would have had one play with
and still had to kick it
20-some yards into the end zone. I think he would have gotten the same result regardless of how he managed the clock there. Now, if they would have, if that play would have stood, then you call timeout quickly. You have an option down there. But if they score a touchdown there, I guess maybe the game looks a little bit different. But just the way they were playing, I don't think it affects the outcome in any way.
34-3, probably not.
34-7 is not much different than 34-3.
The red zone struggles continue, though. They get into the red zone. Obviously, the penalty pulls them back out of the red zone. Then they end up kicking a field goal. It's like, you just felt like you needed a touchdown there. How can this team regroup after a loss like this? Because you're still fighting for bowl eligibility here. You got to win 2 of the next 3.
It shouldn't be hard. You lost to a team that's, by the end of the regular season, I think is going to be ranked in the top 10. And
they got a chance.
Who knows? You went out and you beat Florida State in the ACC title game. Who knows what could happen with Louisville?
Here's the thing. It's 1 loss.
Yeah.
It's not like you made a quintuple bogey and you're like, I got to work my way back from this for the rest of the round. Like, it's 1 loss. Whether you lose by 1 point or 31 points, it counts the same in the standings. They had a bad game. You flush it. You go, hey, that was a good team. They beat the crap out of us. Move on to the next week. That's the only way you can do it with a game like this.
And Tech has showed, even last year was a tough year. I never felt like Virginia Tech just quit or anything like that. Obviously, they won their last game of the season. They started off 1-3 this year, and it was not a problem for them to come back and play a really good game against Pitt. That they got beat fairly handily at Florida State. Well, I mean, they got over that easily and came back and beat Wake Forest. So they've always shown the ability to not let it bother them. I mean, I'm sure it bothers them, but it's just not going to be an issue. It's a great opportunity to win a football game next week. So if they're not up for that from a mental standpoint, then they shouldn't be playing. But I don't think that's going to be a problem.
So how are you guys feeling ahead of this BC game? We still going bowling? You got to win 2 of the next 3. I want to get David's thoughts on that too.
No, I thought Tech was going to lose this past weekend, and they did. So it doesn't really affect it. I mean, I thought Boston College was going to be a tough, close game. Whether or not Virginia Tech beat beat Louisville. I think Boston College, when you look at all their games this year, they beat Georgia Tech by 15, and they got boat raced by Louisville. Other than that, all their scores are one-score games. They've won their 5 wins against FBS competition are by an average of 7 points. Actually, their win against FCS Holy Cross was only by 3 points as well. And then 2 of the 3 losses were by 1 score. They particularly love the score 27-24. That's been the score in three of their 9 games. Almost all of their games are extremely close. I see nothing to indicate why this one won't be extremely close. The issue with Tech is the Hokies don't do well in close games, generally speaking. If Tech wins, it's generally by a blowout. Like when Pry wins, he doesn't mess around, with the exception of the Liberty game. He blows them out. And Tech doesn't do well on the road. So those 2 things don't bode well for the Hokies this week, but that trend has to be broken at some point, right? And the fact of the matter is Boston College is 6-3, but they're beating up on a bunch of bad teams, and they're barely beating them. Like, how do you only beat Syracuse by 7 when the quarterback throws you the ball 4 times, 4 interceptions? How do you beat 1-8 UConn by 1 touchdown, right? How do you barely beat 3-6 Army? So they're like, I respect their turnaround. I think on the whole, Jeff Hafley's done a good job there. But they're barely scrapping by against some bad teams. It's a game Virginia Tech has a very good opportunity to win. They've just got to go up there and limit mistakes and got to do. They finally need to have an average game rushing defense. They're not going to shut down, the BC running game with the way their quarterback can run it. But if they can go up there and just have an average run defense performance for the first time this year, I think they can come away with the win.
Yeah, I think you look at this BC game, and I think BC and Virginia Tech are the same team. I mean, you look at the SP plus predictions. BC's actually ranked lower than Virginia Tech. I think the projection has it BC by 0.5. I mean, they're basically dead heat. Yeah. And I think a lot of people look at this matchup, they go, BC's on a roll. They've won 5 straight. Yes, Virginia, Army, Georgia Tech, UConn, Syracuse, not a murderer's row of opponents. Not been winning by a lot in those games either, with the exception of Georgia Tech, which was closer than that score indicated. That was a tight game going into the 4th quarter. You look at their struggles earlier this year, lost to Northern Illinois, barely beat Holy Cross. This is a very average to mediocre Boston College team, which
almost
is right.
Beat Florida State though.
Okay, down 31-3 at some point and came back after Florida State.
Sleepy noon game. Yeah. Florida State's up by 4 scores.
I think I say mediocre team. That's what Virginia Tech is. They're in the same boat. They're in the same, like I said before, the creamy middle of the ACC. That's just where they are. They've proven they can beat teams at the bottom rung, just like Virginia Tech has. So, this is on the road. If you're going to pick a road venue, like I know people like to lump the basketball struggles in with football. It's not as bad as it might seem in Chestnut Hill. Since 2012, since Virginia Tech's program really fell off, they're 3-3 up there. They've won there. It's not like Syracuse, where they almost never win. It's not like Pitt, where they almost never win. They've won some games up there. It's hardly imposing. It's a different kind of challenge because it's just such a lack of an atmosphere sometimes, especially in a noon game where I can't imagine they're going to have a hefty crowd on Saturday for this tilt. So, this one is there for the taking. I think this is a game that they can win. Obviously can't play like they did last week. That will not be a win if they play like that. But, this is a team that's on their level that they can compete against, that they're just not going to be out-talented.
As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. First Bank and Trust Company is a nationally ranked, community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia and Northeast Tennessee, as well as additional presence in North Carolina. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking, financing solutions for personal, agricultural, business, commercial, and mortgage needs, and so much more. Visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. Let's check in with David in the 4th chair. Decono, what you got for us?
Andy and Chris, if you had to guess how many games this season Virginia Tech has played, 9 games, how many games would you say Virginia Tech has converted 2 or fewer third downs? If you had to guess.
9 games.
2.
I was going to say 3.
4.
4?
Yikes.
Wow.
I just looked it up and I ran the numbers. Virginia Tech, that is the most Virginia Tech has played 9 games dating back to 1987. Virginia Tech has only had 2 seasons with 3 where they had 3 games where they did not convert more than 2 third downs in a game. One was 89, one was 05. Virginia Tech has had 4 games this year where it has not converted more than 2 third downs in a game. I went and looked. Do you want to guess what Virginia Tech's percentage is on 3rd and 3 or shorter?
3rd and 3 or shorter. They didn't have too many of those opportunities this past week.
It doesn't sound like it's great, is my guess.
35%.
It's 49%.
Is it really?
Oh, okay.
It's about halfway. 3rd and 4 through 7 is 41%. Now,
That's actually not bad for that.
Now, what do you want to guess the 3rd and 8 or longer
Oh
percentage?
my God,
Probably like
12%?
8% or something. Yeah.
19.
Okay.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech is 11 of 59 on 3rd and 8 or longer this year. Now, I went and looked at, in wins versus losses. Let me read you what Tech's conversions versus attempts on 3rd and 8 or longer in the losses this year. 2 and 9, 1 and 8, 0 and 6, 0 and 8, and the other loss was 0 and 6.
Yeah. Wow.
Tech and people wonder why Tech, you guys were talking earlier about why Tech could not get going. And Louisville won, very good defensive line. But Virginia Tech has shown this season when it gets in terrible situations, it can't get itself out.
Let's see. Drones is 4 of 27 this year on passes that travel more than 20 yards downfield, 20 or more yards downfield in the air. Now, 3 of those went for touchdowns. So, the memorable deep strikes to like Daquan Felton that we saw against Pittsburgh, that we saw against Syracuse. But generally speaking, Virginia Tech has to put it in the air down the field, and the other team knows it's coming. Virginia Tech can't complete those passes.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. Like, this is, in the wins, Virginia Tech was 2 of 5 on 3rd and 8 or longer. 3 of 6, 1 of 4, 2 of 7. And in the others, Tech has converted 3 total times. It's like this is not an offense. And I guess why I bring that up and why I say that is, like, there have been some bad offenses at Virginia Tech in the past, and I think this offense has improved, has taken strides. But this is not a good offense.
So they have to be in a certain situation to be effective. They have to stay ahead of the chains, and they can't be they can't be 2 or 3 scores down in the game. And if both those situations are satisfied, I think it's a very, very effective offense. The good news is, I don't see Boston College this week, or NC State, or UVA, quite frankly. None of those teams are going to be able to blow Tech out. NC State doesn't have the offensive firepower.
And they have the defense to make it a long day.
Correct, but they just it would be very surprising if because of their offense, if at any point, like, their leads they would get an extended lead. UVA is probably not good enough, and Boston College, pretty much all their games have been close. So I think if Virginia Tech, I think they're going to be in these last 3 games all the way through, so they're never going to have to abandon the running game in any of those games. So that'll satisfy one of the 2 requirements for playing good offense. The other is staying out of long yardage situations, and that's a different matter.
Yeah. Do you want to guess? So I just ran the numbers real quick. Do you want to guess what Tech's 3rd and 8 or longer conversion rate is in losses this year?
I want to say they've converted 3 of them all year.
3 of 37. That's 8%.
Mm-hmm.
So I bring that up because this is an offense that cannot put itself in bad situations, and what it got at Louisville was bad situations.
A bunch of bad situations.
David Teal tweeted, I think it was at halftime, just what Tech had gotten into in 3rd down. I mean, and I think Andy put it in one of his stories. I mean, it's like 3rd and 10 or more like 6 different times. Like you cannot put your offense in that bad of situations. I also want to bring up, do you guys remember I think Andy, were you on the beat for the Alabama game in 2013?
Yes.
Do you remember how many yards Tech threw for in that game?
Not a lot, because I don't think either team got over 200 in that game.
There's 60-something.
59.
And Trey Edmonds had the long touchdown.
Touch. Yeah, he had a good game. I remember there was a bunch of drops. Like, you knew after that game exactly what Tech had at wide receiver that year, which was pretty much nothing.
Logan Thomas was 5 of 26 in that game.
Right.
For 59 yards.
And half of them were drops.
Yeah. Virginia Tech threw for 72 yards, fewest since that game on Saturday.
Oh, wow.
So that's another stat I bring up. I do have a couple questions. A lot of them revolve around the offensive line. And I'm going to kind of pair them up together. First of all, and Chris, this might be more up your alley. Somebody asked, on the first play of the game, the Louisville defender blew by Chaplin with ease. How does knowing right out of the gate that the left tackle is most likely going to get beat impact the way they call plays?
It wasn't Chaplin. Chaplin, normally, yes, you go in and block the inside man. But if he had blocked the inside man, then it would have been 4-on-1 because you had 3 guys blocking. I think in that situation, Braylon Moore should have broken off the 3-on-1 on the inside and blocked the blitzer.
Well, that's why I thought it was a screen of some sort, because they got in there so easily that like they're supposed to release those guys. But something got messed up.
Something got messed up. It's 2 freshmen. Whose ever fault it was? It's 2 freshmen starting right next to each other, and there's the reason you don't want freshmen playing a whole lot. It's because they're going to make mental mistakes, and the good news is they become sophomores. I know the offensive line, it's not good enough right now. They're playing too many young players, but even the experienced players, they're on their 3rd offensive line coach in as many years. So it's not the scheme. They know the scheme for the most part. It's like for those returning players, that's 3 different types of technique you're taught on a yearly basis, and so hopefully Tech can have some continuity with offensive line coach after this year, because they need that going forward. You know, they can't afford to keep changing offensive line coaches every year.
Yeah, that's what we got another question on that. Assuming Ron Crook stays, assuming he's still here another year in the same system, they don't try to change the scheme or anything, what kind of improvement do you expect? What do you expect Tech's offensive line to look like next year?
I expect solid improvement. You know, like I think Moore and Chaplin have talent. And I think, Brody Meadows has talent, and, they're starting to put Johnny Garrett in there some, and I really like him as an athlete. He was a high school tight end. He's got good mobility on the edge. Now, I also think that they can go out there and help themselves with 1 or 2 guys in the portal, give themselves more depth and more options, and do a little better job than getting your last guy on your board like they did this year as far as transfer portal goes. So get some of your top guys on your board, which they failed to do, which when you're changing offensive line coaches and your old offensive line coach really didn't want to go in the portal anyway. But I think they have a chance to have better depth next year, and they will have more experience. So yes, in theory, they'll be a better offensive line next year. I mean, you're talking about a group of very young players, freshmen on the offensive line, redshirt sophomore at quarterback. Every player on this offense is eligible to return next year, but I think they can supplement their offensive line through the portal as well, just to create more competition up front.
It's amazing how just pure experience makes offensive lines a whole lot better. Like, you're just around longer, you've been in the weight room for 5 years, you're bigger, you're stronger, played together more. I mean, that's why it's tough to build those things through the portal sometimes, because when somebody goes in there, everybody gobbles up those guys real quick, even the big program. So you sort of have to do it organically, and there's not really a great way to rush that sometimes. You just sort of need that natural development to happen over time.
Andy,
go ahead, David.
Andy, does it give you pause? We've talked about the linebackers a lot over the course of the season. Does it give you pause that we saw the linebackers kind of revert to those same issues this week?
I don't know if it gives me pause as much as, they play poorly against good teams and they played okay against bad teams. I mean, I think that's a level of competition type thing. They're going to going to look good relative to the competition that they're playing. And I don't know if that's something you fix in season. I don't know if they were necessarily in the wrong spots all the time the other day. I just think that they were getting physically dominated and getting pushed off the ball, and that created those holes for them to run it. And so that's a credit to Louisville. I think they were a good blocking team, and I think it's just Virginia Tech needs to get better at linebacker.
Well, on the Ron Crook topic of conversation, if for whatever it's worth, at Tech Talk Live every week, I've never seen anything like it. He's there, sits in the front row. He just enjoys going to the radio show. He just goes, likes listening to Coach Pry talk, and for no reason just goes every week. Every week he's there. It's pretty cool.
Maybe he gets a free meal out of it.
Maybe he does. Maybe he does. I love Tech Talk Live, but I've never seen an assistant coach always be there. And sometimes the coaches will come, and then when their segment's done, they'll even take off. They don't stick around. Coach Pry is very good at sticking around, I will say. But anyhow, anything else, David, before we go over our buy or sell results?
I guess the one other question I wanted to ask is 6 wins, like in your mind, Chris, what is a successful season from here on out? Is it 6 wins in a bowl game?
For me, I always said it's not necessarily about, I wouldn't put a number on anything. I wanted to go to a bowl, and I thought that was a realistic and fair goal. But for me, it was always more about, you get to the end of the season, what does the team look like, and do I feel like they're making progress, and do I see a light at the end of the tunnel? I didn't think any of those things were going to happen after the first 4 games of the season. And now with the offensive scheme change, despite this past week's result, I still feel a lot better than I did. The opportunity's there to go to a bowl game. I don't think Tech has won its last football game this year, I'll say that. I think they're going to beat UVA because everybody's beaten UVA outside of North Carolina. But it's just a matter of do they win one of those other 2 games to qualify for the bowl. If they don't make a bowl game, it's going to be more about the start than the finish, in my opinion. It's going to be more about losing to Purdue at home. It's going to be more about losing to Marshall, who, as it turns out, isn't a particularly good team, and they don't have a quarterback at all. Shouldn't have lost that game, in my opinion. Shouldn't have lost to Purdue. I don't think the Tech would have lost either one of those games if they were running the current offensive scheme at the time. So when it comes down to it, if Tech doesn't make a bowl, it'll be the beginning of the season that cost them and not the end. If they did happen to go 5-7, I don't think I would have felt great about that before the season started, but considering the 1-3 start and then the midseason improvement, the midseason scheme change, I would feel better about it than I would have anticipated if you told me before the season that they're going to go 5-7. But there's still games left to be played. I think the defense is what it is at this point. I mean, I think we know what the team is at this point. It's just a matter of the mental focus on a week-to-week basis, turnovers, things like that. I think if they do go to a bowl after a 1-3 start, everybody should be extremely pleased with that. Although at the same time, let's say you do go 6-6, you'd really like to play those first few games over again because you would have a chance to do even better. But I'm not letting the Louisville loss discourage me. It doesn't undo the progress that has been made. Tech is capable of beating up on bad teams now and looking good on offense when they do it. I know they beat up on Boston College last year, but they didn't look good offensively when they did it. So progress has been made.
Yeah, I'm with you on relative to how they started the season. And if they make a bowl game, they'd be 5-3 in the conference, which I think exceeded anybody's expectations coming into the year. If they come up short, they'd be 4-4. They won 1 game in the ACC last year. I think that's still improvement. So while it'd be disappointing based on what you saw in the middle of the season, what they were capable of not to get to those 6 wins, I don't think it's make or break. I had a mailbag question with that last week, and that's sort of how I answered it. Is I think you've seen progress with this team. Is it happening as quickly as you'd like? No, because everybody wants it to happen faster than this, and obviously have seen some of the potential of this team. But I do think it's a step forward nonetheless.
For the sake of time, we'll kind of go through quickly our buy or sell results here. But I will say pretty good weeks for everybody, despite the lines being way off, and who could have expected that. But Chris definitely took the cake this week. Chris, you went 17-6.
No kidding.
Which is pretty darn impressive.
Man, there were 23 questions.
Yeah,
Man.
we did a lot of
You
questions.
did 23 questions.
Yeah,
wow.
we did.
Really upped
Actually, we did 25 questions, and 2 of them were a push because Jamari Thrash didn't play.
Okay.
Yep. And then Andy and David both went 15-8. So you guys tied. David was on a red hot start. When I was doing this, I was like, oh, wow, David's running away with it. He started 6-0 and then kind of balanced everything back out. But so the all-time right now, Chris is... And now, remember, Chris and David missed a week, so we went by percentage as well. Chris is 23-14 all-time this year. That's a 62% correct percentage. David is 22-14-1 because he had that one, and he's 59%. Will is 9-10, so he's 47%. He's below the Mendoza line, so to speak. And then Andy is still winning it. He's 37-19. That's good for 66%. So we go through the questions here. Jawar Jordan, 125 yards rushing. He did not. He had 57 yards rushing. Chris bought it. Andy bought it. David bought it. So everybody started 0-1 on the week.
I didn't know he was going to be hurt when we were recording the thing.
Right. But he played. So it was
did
like
play. So
Vegas
you
would
would've
still
lost in
take your
Vegas.
money.
Yep, the money would be gone.
Bashal to an anytime touchdown. No, everybody bought it, but David sold it, and David was correct.
Dang.
Jamari Thrash, 82 or more receiving yards. Push because he didn't play. Same with Thrash, 6 or more receptions. We pushed it. Virginia Tech passes for 220 or more yards. They did not. They passed for 72 yards. Grant Wells had 2 passing attempts in that process.
It was set. The game was set up for them to go over with that because they were down so much they would have had to throw it the whole time. They just couldn't throw it.
Literally couldn't
do it.
Chris sold that. Andy bought it. David sold it. So Chris and David were correct. Virginia Tech 4 or more sacks. You guys all said they wouldn't do it, and they didn't. They only had 1. Cole Nelson had the sack. Virginia Tech wins the turnover battle. Chris said they would. Andy and David said they wouldn't.
Oh, that was when I was just going against the grain.
Yes.
Remember?
Well, it worked for you, though, because you won the week.
I did,
So, and Tech did not win the turnover battle. It was a pretty turnover-free game. Louisville had the 1 pick. Virginia Tech did not get a turnover. Daquan Wright, 4 or more catches. Everybody said no, he wouldn't have any. He had no catches. So, there you go. 2-15 or more carries. Everybody bought that. He did not. He had 11 carries on the day.
I think
He should have had more. I mean, they run a lot of play. There weren't a lot of plays in this game, period.
51 offensive plays for both teams.
I mean, he averaged 5.2 yards a carry. But what do? You're down by 30 points.
Right.
You're going to keep running the ball?
The game only lasted 2 hours, 45 minutes. David, that's the 3rd shortest game at Tech since 2000, right?
That's correct.
And what were the 2 shorter games?
The James Madison game and UVA 2006.
Okay.
Jalen Lane, 70 or more all-purpose yards. Didn't happen. He had 15, which is crazy. Chris bought it. Andy bought it. David sold it. So David was correct. Malachi Thomas, touchdown. Everybody sold it. David bought it. It didn't happen. Nobody scored a touchdown. Virginia Tech, 3 or more field goals. Andy and David bought it. Chris sold it. There were only 1 field goal for the Hokies.
But it was a good field goal.
It was great.
Should count as 3. Right?
Important field goal.
It was 3 points for whatever that's worth. Steven Gosnell, 3 or more catches. Chris sold it. Andy and David bought it. Andy's philosophy there, because I listened back this morning, was he thought they were going to have to throw it. Didn't happen. He had 2 catches for 19 yards.
And one was wiped out by the penalty. That should have hit.
That's right.
These cheating refs cost me a win. Here I was agreeing with the refs. I should have been disagreeing. It would have got me another point on this.
But your reasoning was completely right. Virginia Tech was going to have to throw the ball.
That's right.
That's true.
I completely changed my opinion about that play. It was a bogus call. They should go back, retroactively give him the catch.
Jawar Jordan, 2 or more touchdowns. He did have 1 touchdown in his 14 carries. Everybody bought he would have 2 or more. He did not get there. He had the 1. Tucker Holloway returns 3 or more punts. No, he returned just 1 punt for 17 yards. So Chris and Andy were correct. David said he would return 3 or more. He did not. Antoine Powell-Rhineland, 2 or more sacks. Didn't happen. He had 0. Cole Nelson had the 1. Everybody sold it anyways, so everybody won. Louisville, 6 or more tackles for loss. That did happen. Chris, you said it wouldn't. Andy and David said it would happen. They had 8 tackles for loss, amassing 55 yards of lost yardage for the Hokies.
Chris couldn't have been feeling good after that first play.
I was looking at sacks. Oh, yeah.
Chris goes in there. It's like, all right, less than 6 TFLs the first play. They just bury drones in the ground. Like, oh, this could be a long day.
Yes. Tech runs 3 or more trick plays. That is a question I'll never ask again. They ran one that I could remember. Obviously, the pass interference to 8. They were looking for.
That's one of their best plays offensively, getting 15 yards out of that.
That's very true. They didn't
I don't think it was going to be completed
did
either. That guy probably didn't need to interfere.
It's hard to say.
Cameron Kelly was the one that did it.
Of course he was. Yeah. It's hard to say whether like the first play of the game was going to be a trick play because he got sacked so quickly, and then. What about the third play where
what if he was going to lateral it to the running back coming out? That would have been a trick play.
Exactly. Yeah.
We'll never know.
Well, everybody sold it anyway, so I gave everybody the point.
Okay.
Someone leads by double digits at some point. That obviously took place. Everybody bought that, so everyone was correct. Louisville, 26 or more passing attempts. Chris sold it. Andy bought it. David sold it. It didn't happen. They only had 13 in total. One of them was by the backup quarterback. That was crazy. That was a big storyline in the game. They only had to throw the ball 12 times, essentially. 13 in total. Louisville, 270 or more passing yards. Everybody sold it. It didn't happen. They only had 141 yards through the air. Kyron Drone's interception. Everybody said it was, everyone seemed hesitant, but everyone said the streak would come to an end, so everybody was correct. Unfortunate how it happened because it almost was like kind of not his fault. It was a tip. It looked like it hit the hands.
It did, but he threw it. He was double covered.
It was coverage, and the guy made a nice play to knock it back.
Didn't even he say last week basically that he was due for an interception?
Well, yeah. I mean, he almost handed one off to Syracuse in the red zone down there. So
yeah. That
living dangerously up to that point.
Yep.
No doubt. Plummer interception. Andy thought it would happen. David thought it would happen. Chris said it wouldn't. Chris was the only one that was right.
You sure that wasn't incompletion? You had one incompletion?
Yeah, right.
This was kind of like, remember the last time Tech played at Louisville, Hendon Hooker was 10 of 10 passing?
Yeah.
Very similar to Jack Plummer's stat line overall.
Tech covers. Everybody said they would cover, and they did not, obviously. The spread finished. I think at game time it was 9.5. Is that where it landed?
It wasn't 32?
No.
You sure about that? Okay.
No, I'm positive. That was Michigan's spread.
Oh, okay.
They were supposed to beat Purdue by 32.5 or whatever. Tech wins. Obviously, that did not happen. Everybody sold it anyways, so everybody got a point on that. So one more time, Chris wins the week, 17-6. That's pretty impressive. David and Andy both go 15-8. Well, one last thing to cover here before I let you guys go. Hoops tonight. It's a doubleheader. Women play High Point at 5 o'clock inside Castle Coliseum. The men will follow that up. They'll play Coppin State at 8 p.m. I know Andy's not a huge basketball guy, but feel free to chime in at any point. But more for Chris and David. Just what do you guys expect tonight? What are you looking forward to? Hoop season finally here. It's worth bringing up because it's very timely today.
I expect 2 easy wins. And the thing I'm most interested in seeing is the rotation. I would say for both teams, specifically for the men, who's the first guy off the bench? What does that post rotation look like? How much do we see Barron at the 4? How much do we see him at the 5? Little things like that you would look for in an early season game where, you're going to win by double digits.
David?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure which team I have more questions about. I would say the men, except the women, I've only seen 3 players play. So I'm honestly got more questions, I think, about the women's team just because we've never seen half these players or over half these kids play in person. High Point is a very interesting team. It's very similar to Florida Gulf Coast. Shoot the 3 ball. They kind of play 5 out, so they don't have a center. So it'll be interesting to see how Tech defends it. Might not be your super easy opening game. Coppin State is weird. First-year head coach. So a lot of unknown for Tech on the women's side and then unknowns for Coppin State on the men's side. I was talking with Evan Hughes. He's calling the game on the AC Network tonight, AC Network Extra for the men after he calls the women's game on the radio. And he was like, he was trying to figure out like last week, like how in the world he was supposed to prep for Coppin State because they have a new head coach. Half team is new, so I expect the men to be okay. Like 25.5 point favorite when I checked last night. They covered last year's opener, 34 points. So I expect Tech to look fine in both games. The women's game is intriguing because it's not your normal game in terms of style. And then the men, I think how Tech rotates, kind of like Chris. And I'm also interested to see how much Recksteiner and Jaden Young play as the true freshmen, because I expect everybody to kind of play a lot. Those two guys specifically, kind of see what they're made of, I think, is what I'm most interested to see.
Awesome. Well, what's coming up on TSL this week? What can people be on the lookout for? Because the fun thing about hoop season being here and how the schedules are playing out, usually you play a bunch of kind of cupcake